Hey friends, thanks for joining me today. My name is Joel David Bond, and if you're new here, I'm a teacher, traveler, writer, and speaker. And today we're working with teaching English literature to middle school students. The system that I have is easily adaptable for both primary and high school or beyond, so feel free to stick around and see how you might be able to adapt the system for your own use. If you haven't watched video 1 in this 4-part series, go ahead and pause that and jump over to see that on annotation grids, my system called Snap and Scribble, and then come back here to watch the reading responses, which is Think and Ink, as I refer to it. We're going to work with reading responses today, which is a way to help your students think critically about the text that they're reading through written response. So let's dive into it straight away. I've got some slides I've put together to help guide us through this that shows you some of the materials that I use. All the materials that you do see today will be available on my Teachers Pay Teachers store at English Lifeboat. You can find all my materials there available for purchase. Again, you don't have to purchase anything here. Obviously, I appreciate your support, and many of these materials you can develop on your own. But if you'd like ready-made things, you can go ahead and find them on my Teachers Pay Teachers store. So let's start with the pain point right away. Do you ever feel like your students just skim the text instead of truly engaging with it? Well, reading responses are a way to help overcome that. It gives your students the opportunity to think reflectively and critically about the text that they're reading, gives them the opportunity and space to develop their thought through written expression, and then through that basis of written expression, we can develop that and extend that into their oral expression in stage 3, our next video. So this is part of a structured system that helps your students develop deeper insights into the text that they're reading. And here you can see that 4-part system. Snap and Scribble was video 1. You should have just watched that already. Think and Ink, we're now in video 2. This will lead directly to our Speak and Spark in video 3 and lock it in video 4. So stick around for all 4 parts of the system if you want the best benefit for your students as they develop their critical thinking and engagement with literature. So let's go straight into what is a reading response. It is exactly that. It's a response to the reading. And I do that in written form. So I do a really simplified, deceptively simple actually, written response to the text. And the anatomy of this is really simple. It's a 5-point structure. I ask my students to answer a prompt that I give them directly in the first sentence, provide some evidence for that thought from the text, so cite a page in a chapter with a quotation, explain why that evidence is important using your own words, connect it to a bigger picture, a big idea, a thought, a theme, another piece of literature, something in the news, the real world, and then wrap it up in a strong conclusion. I ask them to do that in a minimum of 5 sentences. And as simple as that sounds, it is actually more difficult than you might think, and students do take the full hour usually to complete their reading responses. What's great about this though is it does force some critical thinking, and when I do this in class, it really allows me to provide immediate feedback to students as they're developing their ideas. Now, one thing that I love to do with this is that I don't just simply ask them to respond to one single prompt. As I introduce this, we might have one particular response type, but as the year progresses, I'll provide them more choice and more sort of lateral thinking across those choices. Here on the screen right now, I have 15 different response types that I employ with my students that they can choose from as the year progresses. So these are roughly ordered from easiest to more complicated responses. It's a bit of an arbitrary ranking, if you will, but I found that giving an opinion or creating a personal connection with the text are easiest responses for my students. Things like a plot summary, a chapter summary, describe the setting, recognizing a big idea, predicting the future, what's going to happen next in the book, all the way down to more complicated things like symbolism and imagery or language recognition. So things like metaphor and sort of literary devices, figurative language. So I ask my students on any given week to respond to one of these types. At the beginning of the year, it might be we all respond to the same one, and as the year progresses, they might have more degree of choice between these. And there are ways that we can talk about diversifying these responses, because this is the bread and butter of my class. I do this every week, and as I do this, it really does create and strengthen that critical thinking skill. Now, at the end of this current academic year, I can simply stand in front of the class, say it's a reading response Tuesday, and they all are pretty ready to go and will develop some really great work for me. So here's our reading responses, those different types that I provide for my students, but let's talk about sort of how we format this. So at the beginning of the year, I make sure that I scaffold this really well so they know what to expect on any given response type. So here's an example from my Think and Ink Google Slides for theme recognition. All of my scaffolding really revolves around the P format. I introduce this at the beginning of the year, gets a good chuckle. I tell my students to P on their reading response, which means point, evidence, and explanation. So I ask them to provide their point right up front, provide their evidence in the form of a quotation from the text, and then explain why that evidence supports their idea. Typically what I'll do is I'll sort of scaffold, I will scaffold this idea, the structure at the very beginning of the year when we first introduce the reading responses, and then as the year progresses, I might lift the scaffolding and instead simply provide them with an example prompt. So here you see on the screen now a prompt for that same scaffolded theme recognition, and here it's a more specific pointed question that the students should respond to in their reading response. Again, as the year progresses, I may actually then lift these prompts and simply say, this week is a theme recognition reading response. Create your own prompt and respond to it that way. So as they develop confidence in their reading response skills and their written expression, I will often remove some of the scaffolding and see what they can produce on their own. Here, what we're doing is building this in from the very beginning of the year, and so we'll have more time. It actually takes more time to develop this, but once you've done that, the system is really fantastic, and I have very little lesson planning, to be honest. How do you introduce this, though? So how do you get to this point where you can sort of kick back and be like, all right, it's Reading Response Tuesday, let's go? Well, I introduced this at the beginning of the year, usually immediately following a guided practice session with the annotation grids. So in video 1, you've seen the snap and scribble where they have the 9-square grid and they're quick capturing these ideas as we read in class. Hopefully, if they've been doing this and following the instructions, they'll have put down some citations, some chapters or page numbers for those ideas. If they haven't, I'll always go back and encourage them to do so. When I first introduce reading responses then, I'll say, let's look at your annotation grids, and here's our main reading response for this week. We're going to give an opinion on chapter 4, or we're going to write about a personal connection from chapters 1 through 3, or whatever it is, wherever we're at. I'll encourage students to draw on the ideas that they've put in their annotation grids. So again, I might ask them, look specifically, what did you write down for personal reaction? What did you doodle? What question did you come up with? And have them develop their own prompt in conjunction with a prompt that I might provide them. I like to provide students with some optional sentence frames at the beginning as well. So I might simply have 5 different sentence frames at the beginning that says, here's how you introduce your idea, here's how you give context to your quotation, here's a way that you could explain that quotation, here's an opportunity for you to develop that idea, make a connection, and here's a sentence frame to help you build a conclusion. Again, as the year progresses, I remove those frames, those sentence frames, and allow them opportunity for more freedom of expression. But in doing so, we've built in immediately that critical thinking skill through all of this framework. One thing that I really love about this idea of reading responses, though, is that I want to encourage my students to develop their ideas and to organize their thoughts as a priority above having the right answer. I'm less interested in whether or not they can come to the same conclusion about the text that I have or that other literary analysts have, and instead can they actually express and defend their idea. So whether or not I think it's right is almost irrelevant to their reading responses and the mark that they receive, the grade and how I evaluate this. So let's talk about that actually right now. How do we take a look at evaluating these? So first off, if you're interested in these materials, you can find everything from my Think and Ink slides to a format and a grading format on my Teachers Pay Teachers store at English Lifeboat. I use these on a weekly basis. They're great templates. It's easy to just plug and play with whatever you have. The thing that's great about these reading responses, here you see on the screen, just kind of a real simple reading response form. This is available on my Teachers Pay Teachers. It's a 1-page, 5-sentence minimum. So most of my students, they'll get that 5-sentence and they'll be like, okay, we're good. Some will extend past that. Some struggle to meet that 5-sentence minimum. But it's a real low resistance threshold. So you can pretty much get every student to do the work because 5 sentences is not a high threshold for them to cross. It's not this big long composition. It's not an essay for an exam. It's 5 sentences on your thoughts on this theme for this week. And it's just really easily and accessible for the students. You'll also find on my Teachers Pay Teachers, there's some prompt guides and some response trackers. So if you develop this into your own classroom, I get to a point at the end of the year usually where I allow my students to pick any response type from those 15 as long as they don't repeat a response week after week. And they can track their own ones, tick off what they've done as they progress through a certain novel. So I like to keep these really low stakes. If you've seen my annotation grid video, you know that I like those annotation grids to be no stakes. I don't grade the annotation grids at all. I want that to be very accessible and I want it to have a very low accountability. I want it to be engaging and prompt students just to quick capture the ideas. It's sort of quick and dirty, like let's just do it fast, let's get those annotations in. With the reading responses, I need a certain level of accountability, but I like to keep it super low stakes to encourage that engagement. I always do it in class. It's only 5 sentences, and doing that in class encourages that critical thinking, provides me the opportunity to give some teacher support as I wander around the classroom. And with that handwritten engagement, we don't do tech in the classrooms in my current setting. It really prevents AI responses, which is obviously a problem in our current teaching methodology around the world. So I like to do this manually in class, pen and paper, 5 sentences, super simple. Keeps it straight out of the students' minds. And I use a really simple grading rubric. I want to keep it efficient, keep it meaningful, keep it simple. On the back of my reading response forms, I ask for 5 things. Do you have a main idea? Did you give me a quotation with the citation page number? Did you expand that idea? Does it make sense? And I ask them to highlight a few key things just to make it easy to identify what they've done. So what I ask them to do is I highlight their main idea, highlight their quotation. You can have them choose to analyze to highlight their analysis. I like them to highlight their chosen category. As I start developing different categories, it makes it easier for me to see who's responded to which one. And as long as they hit those 5 things, 5 points. It's a really easy 5 points for a lot of students, but surprisingly, some still struggle. So I try to keep the stakes super, super low. I wander around the classroom as they're working. I ask them about what they're developing. I help give some guided insight. I usually try to get around to every student, just ask them one pointed question. What's your response this week? How are you developing it? One thing that you can do here is with some common challenges. So you might, when you first implement this, get 1-sentence answers or 2 short answers. So ways to fix this would be to just model some good responses. Take previous week's responses and have sort of a top winner, share that with the class, give extra credit points to those who are exceptionally good. However you want to manage that, you can in your own classroom. And also to provide some scaffolding sentence frames. So have those 5-sentence frames so for them to develop that structured framework on that 5-sentence reading response. Sometimes you might find that they summarize instead of analyze, so this might require some more in-depth instruction at the beginning to teach the difference between summary and analysis. What I've found is that in asking my students to respond to a specific prompt in the first sentence of their reading response, that automatically forces students to develop the idea rather than repeat and sort of summarize that idea at the end of their reading response, which is typically what happens before I started introducing the prompts. So that was a quick fix for me, was to just simply say, answer the prompt in sentence 1, provide your evidence in sentence 2, and then explain and expand afterwards. That is one way that helps address this issue, and then it might require just a little more direct instruction on top of that. They struggle to use evidence effectively. Again, you might find their quotations don't match their main idea, or they're not able to find a quotation to support their main idea. So again, using sentence frames, practice breaking down quotes, finding relevant information from a larger passage, finding main ideas in a certain text, doing some work with the actual text can help provide this, and then always refer them back to their own annotation grids and say, did you write down your citation for where you get this idea? That's their initial foundation for developing this to begin with. So a couple of quick fixes there to help with these reading responses to get better work. As I said at the beginning of this video, it fits into a bigger picture of this 4-stage cycle. So our next video will be Speak and Spark, how to get your students to actually talk about what they've been reading. And this has been Think and Ink, so we were doing a written response. First lesson was annotation grids, quick capture, and after we're Speak and Spark, we're going to come into our Lock It In where they master these ideas. This whole thing just goes in cycles, so I do a few chapters from a book every week, and we just do this in repetition, 4 lessons a week, and it works incredibly well. Students know what to expect, and I get some great work out of my students every week. Some ways you can implement this in your classroom. So the first one is I would really recommend set your routines. It's always better to have a routine and establish that and create variety within it than to simply always be looking for the next quick fix. So save yourself from lots of lesson planning, save yourself from a lot of headache, and establish a routine for weekly annotations and reading responses so that your students know what to expect. Second, scaffold their work. Check out my Teachers Pay Teachers slides and all the information that's there so that you can create those sentence frameworks so that they know what to expect, and then slowly remove some of that scaffolding so that they know how to do this on their own. And finally, allow some exploration with your students. Again, I'm not interested in whether or not they've got the right answers all the time. I'm more interested in, can they think critically on their own and support their ideas with evidence from the text. Even if the idea is completely off base from how I interpret the text, if they can support it and show evidence and explain their idea, great. You're going to get 5 points for your reading response. And what I usually find is those off-base ideas self-correct by the time we get to our Harkness Circle Speak and Spark moment. There's a lot of peer correction that happens. You can also do peer correction with the reading responses. So rather than grade them yourself as a teacher, you can do a peer response, have them trade amongst each other, and mark those 5 points there based on what they've read from their partner. This is a great way to get your students exposed to more than one idea and help self-correct, again, some of the off-base ideas that might be developing from this low-stakes, low-threshold resistance kind of work. So try it out for yourself and let me know how it works in your classroom. I would love some feedback. Leave a note in the comments if you think you want to try this. And if you found this helpful, then please head over to my Teachers Pay Teachers. I would love your support financially that way. Like and subscribe to these videos and share them with another teacher friend who you think might find it useful to teach literature at their school. Thanks so much for staying with me all the way to the end, and I'll see you in video 3. Take care.